This event is a really important milestone in our global effort to close the nature finance gap. Let me begin by recognizing IAPB for its outstanding leadership. The UK is proud to have co-founded the panel and to be a core financial supporter of this work. Thank you to the members for your expertise, your vision, and your commitment that you continue to bring to this. This work is hard, but this is work that the world needs. Today's launch of the panel's new technical report is a major step forward because it provides a clear global baseline of national policy frameworks. It highlights the range of regulated nature credit markets that is emerging worldwide, and it offers practical pathways for scaling high-integrity markets that deliver real outcomes for nature. We know that well-designed nature markets can unlock investment at scale while safeguarding credibility, inclusivity, and equity. And we know that the world faces a nature finance gap of hundreds of billions each year. We are here in Belém at the heart, at the beginning of the gateway to the Amazon rainforest, and President Lula has brought us here to show us so that we can not just know in our minds the challenges of providing livelihoods to rural communities and river dwellers, but so that we can actually feel and see and hear it for ourselves. So this nature finance gap cannot be filled by public finance alone. We need markets that value the services that ecosystems provide. The salt marshes south of New York preventing flooding, worth about $625 million a year. The value of the ecosystem services of bees to the UK economy in terms of crop pollination. That is what a high-integrity biodiversity credit market can offer. Measurable, verifiable outcomes to restore and conserve nature, built on science and social integrity. Integrity is everything. We need markets that are credible, inclusive, and impactful, that inspire investor confidence, whilst ensuring benefits flow fairly to those on the ground. In the UK, we are developing world-leading nature investment standards aligned with IAPB best practice, because experience shows clear guidance, robust monitoring, and alignment with public policy is essential for investor confidence and environmental integrity. We're committed to sharing what we have learned and to learn from you. Through UK International Climate Finance, we are protecting and restoring ecosystems worldwide, mobilising over £21 billion in public and private finance, supporting millions of people and helping them to manage over 12 million hectares of land more sustainably. That's an area nearly as large as England. IAPB brings coherence to this fast-moving landscape because its framework for high-integrity biodiversity credit markets, which I launched at the Cali Colombia COP last year, sets out the principles that all credible systems must follow, ensuring that biodiversity outcomes are real, additional, and enduring, that local communities share the benefits, and that market mechanisms reinforce and don't replace strong environmental governance. That will give governments, investors, and developers a shared reference point, a common language of trust. And as we look to the conclusion of this COP, IAPB's insights will be so valuable in aligning nature and climate finance showing biodiversity credits are a cornerstone of the nature-positive bioeconomy we urgently need. Everyone has to step forward. Government must provide clear policy and regulatory signals. Investors must commit to integrity, not opportunism, and multilateral development banks must help de-risk investment and scale access. And Indigenous people and local communities must be at the heart of decision-making as partners, not merely participants. So today, let our discussions strengthen that partnership, celebrate what we have achieved, and build nature markets that are fair, transparent, and effective, channeling real finance towards the living systems, the forests, the oceans, and the land on which we all depend. Together we can make these credit markets a force for conservation, economic renewal, and global fairness. Thank you all very much.
Thank you so much, Minister Cray. Like, it's impossible for us to think of a better champion for the IPB work, and she perfectly explained our, let's say, what's in the heart of the framework and the global work we've been doing. And to go into more details on the IPB work, and especially this baseline, the global baseline that was launched, I would love to invite Camille Maclé, the Deputy Director of the International Panel on Biodiversity Credits. And Camille, just the floor is yours. Tell us about the landscape of the policy frameworks that are already in place for scaling nature markets and market development. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ilona. Thank you to all our participants. It is really a pleasure to see you all in here. Thank you, Minister Craig, for your kind words of support. Indeed, it is very opportune that we are here today in the UK Pavilion, considering that the United Kingdom was our first supporter of IAPB, together with the government of France. IAPB has now moved as an independent, non-profit organization. However, we do continue to work closely with the United Kingdom and with France. And we are very grateful for the support from the start and the continued funding from the United Kingdom's government. Since its launch in June 2023, IAPB and its panel members published a set of 21 high-level principles for the integrity of nature credit markets. This document is available online, and for the lucky first person to come to me, perhaps as hard copy. Those high-level principles were presented in Cali at COP16 of the CBD to great interest of participants. And I would also like to emphasize that IAPB did not only produce high-level principles, IAPB is also working with a community of practice of over 40 pilot projects covering 27 countries where we are testing and embedding lessons learned from existing nature credit schemes. As the focus of today's session, I will present the results of the landscape mapping study that IAPB commissioned earlier this year, as we realized that nature credit markets were already operational in a number of countries, and we do believe that those nature credit markets that already exist provide extremely useful lessons learned for us to pursue our mission. The full report of this landscape mapping study is available on the IAPB website, so please by all means visit our website. Download the report. You will see that we have other publications as well on the website, including the role of multilateral development banks in supporting nature credit markets, which is open for consultation. The report on landscape comprises 4 key sections. a landscape mapping of existing nature credit schemes, a discussion of three key archetypes that we see emerging from this landscape mapping, and I will go a little bit deeper into all those. A high-level comparison of how those market schemes compare to the high-level principles, and the discussions of lessons learned based on consultations with those market participants on the challenges, barriers, and opportunities associated with nature credit markets. In our report, in our study, we identified that 19 countries already operate nature credit schemes. Some of them since quite some time, if we consider habitat banking schemes that have been operational in the US and some countries for several decades. We also identify various other countries with emerging, developing nature credit markets. In our analysis, we saw that those 19 frameworks and the other developing frameworks can be classified into three main archetypes. One which we called principles-driven, whereby governments enable market credit through regulations and incentives, however, leave market governance to itself. An archetype which we call shared governance, whereby government provides regulatory oversight and management of some market functions, such as approving and publishing credit transaction data unregistered. And lastly, a more centralized government-led scheme, whereby government assumes the entire responsibility of operating the nature credit market, largely through regulated offsetting schemes. It is worth noting that in the first archetype, principles-driven, we are essentially talking about voluntary credit markets. An analysis of the report shows that the existing nature credit markets already generate significant demand. The market size of wetland mitigation banking in the USA is estimated at about $3.6 billion yearly, whilst that of the German mitigation banking scheme is 2.5 billion euros. We see the drivers in those, especially in voluntary markets related to risk mitigation, CSR policies, and corporate disclosures. The comparison of existing nature credit markets with the high-level principle show a good level of alignment on some of our high-level principles, such as adherence to the mitigation hierarchy and no net loss principles. We can come back on that after the panel if you are interested in further discussion. We also see challenges and some discrepancies between existing schemes and the high-level principles, including those related to fairness and equitable sharing, relating to the participation of local communities and indigenous people, and the sharing of benefits from credit proceeds with indigenous people. In the study, we are presenting a set of learnings which we think will be useful in our work, in our ongoing work. This includes recommendations from interviewees, which I will now list. The importance of political leadership and support from decision leaders within governments, as well as securing long-term funding support to nature credit markets. Consultees also underscored the importance of creating and embedding resilience of nature credit markets within regulation in order for those markets to develop and scale up despite possible geopolitical headwinds as we see some occurring on the planet at the moment. Some challenges came up in interviews. Those are related to, for instance, ecological equivalence, like-for-like ecological equivalence, and the relationship with carbon credit markets. And lastly, data gaps were also identified relating, for instance, to the land rights and use rights of IPLCs. Those learnings and the conclusions of that report are providing the foundation for the policy forum of IAPB, which we launched on Saturday with support from the United Kingdom government, France and Indonesia, and which will operate at least until COP17 of the CBD in Yerevan, Armenia. We will look to consult and collaborate with various governments to provide a global yet regionally differentiated analysis and recommendations for nature credit schemes to emerge. So this is the start of the journey. We will be continuing this work and hopefully be presenting the results at COP17. Thank you again for your support and your continued interest in IAPB.
Thank you so much, Camille. Very useful to have this comprehensive presentation. I'd like to invite now Maria Eduarda Assis, the legal advisor from the Igarapé Institute, who will introduce our very, very distinguished panelists and moderate the session. Thank you, Maria Eduarda.
Hello, everyone. I'm Maria Eduarda, a legal advisor at the Igarapé Institute. As Lona mentioned, we are a think and do tank focused on the areas of security, nature, climate, and its intersections. So I'd like to invite our panelists to the floor. We have with us Marine Collignon, Vice Director for Climate and Environment, French Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Marine has held a range of senior positions in the French public sector and began her career in public life at the French Permanent Mission to the UN. She since then has worked as an expert on sustainable development and the environment at the UN. And before her current role, she has was also head of the unit for water, pollution, and transversal affairs at the Ministry of the Foreign Affairs. I'd like to invite Paul Dale. He's coordinator of the Technical Chamber on Biodiversity of the Brazilian Association of States Environmental Entities, the ABIMA. ABIMA is a key player in the implementation of environmental policy in Brazil, and Paul is currently a member of the International Advisory Board of the State Secretariat of the Environment of São Paulo from Brazil. He's a member of the IUCN Road Commission on Protected Areas and the Technical Advisory Group to UNESCO's Latin America and Caribbean. I think. No, it's back. He holds a master's degree in environmental science from the University of São Paulo as well. Welcome. We also have with us Yoko Watanabe. Welcome. Yoko is Director of Environment of the Asian Development Bank. She leads ADB's environmental sustainability portfolio, including biodiversity, circular economy, and nature-based solutions. She has over 30 years of global experience in biodiversity and natural resource management, held senior roles at the World Bank, WWF, and JEF Secretariat, working in over 130 countries. She's Japanese national with a master's in international development focused on environmental management and advocates for integrating environmental sustainability into development finance and policy. And lastly, Zaria and Inik, welcome. Zaria is legal advisor of the Association of Samaka Communities in Suriname. She's the Association of Samaka Communities was established in 1996 with the aim of representing traditional Samaka leaders and their people from 74 villages in relation to increasing human and land rights violations. She has worked on a number of high-profile legal cases, including a landmark ruling in Suriname granting protections to local and indigenous forest communities. She has held a number of public sector roles, including a deputy director in the Ministry of Land Policy and Forest Management. Welcome, everyone. So now that Ilona and the others also set the scene, I'm delighted to welcome the panelists here and to have today this exceptional group of panelists. They will help us to move from theory to practice by sharing concrete experiences and perspectives on how nature credit markets can work on the ground. And I hope that together we can explore the role of governments, but also multilateral development banks and indigenous people and local communities in shaping credible, inclusive, and also inclusive frameworks for nature markets. So first, I'd like to ask Marine, what has your experience of nature credit markets has been to date? And what key learnings and best practices can you share with us? And lastly, why do you believe governments must have a central role in the emergence of nature credit approaches?
Thank you. You hear me? Yes. Thank you very much, and I'm really happy to be in this panel. As you know, and as the minister indicated, France and the UK have worked together now for a couple of years, and the launch of the IAPB, which was very important in a context where we are seeing at the international level many countries developing their own framework on standards, reflecting their national context and priority. We also were identifying some risk or some difficulty because it's complex. Market carbons have been advanced for quite a while. We see sometimes some of the difficulties. Biodiversity is even more complex in a way because it does not have the same it really depends on the biodiversity of each country, of each region. And so for us, that's why the work of the IAPB is so important in setting out a global baseline to allow comparison across regime, to collect feedbacks, best practices. And the aim really, as I was saying, is not to create identical schemes or standard everywhere, but it's rather to ensure discussion and a level of alignment across countries based on high-level principle of integrity. And I think that's where it will be very interesting to hear all the different perspectives also on this. So as for France, indeed we've been developing for quite a while nature credits, especially through a legal framework that is called the SNCRR. So it's basically working on natural sites for compensation, restoration, and renaturation. They've been in place since November 2023, and it's the first multifunctional biodiversity credit scheme within France and the EU. We know that the European Commission is now working also on nature credits, and we will share our lessons from our national experience. The French SNCRR system is aligned with the IAPB guidelines presented at COP16. So it has a priority to avoid, reduce, offset sequence, mandatory additionality of restoration actions that generate biodiversity credits compared with existing or already planned action. And at this stage, we do not include secondary markets because we see too much risk with this. The primary aim of the mechanism is to restore biodiversity on degraded natural sites for at least 30 years and generate biodiversity certificates, although in some cases it may also support biodiversity maintenance. This scheme is multifunctional. Credits can be used for all purposes identified by the IAPB that include mandatory environmental offsetting, voluntary corporate contribution to strengthen the resilience of value chain, or philanthropic support to nature. Before credits can be sold, the state reviews the proposed restoration projects, drawing on scientific expertise, and issues an approval. And I think that's one of the response to your question about the role of the government. The government kind of provide a safeguard to ensure the quality and the integrity of the credits. It also a coherent planification at the regional level, so in France, so at the territories level also to ensure that there is the right balance. To safeguard market integrity, so we have different rules also, and that's also where the government from our perspective has an important role to set up the framework. So we, for example, have a rule on additionality. Certificate must come from new restoration activities beyond what is already planned or required. There is some standard on transparency and traceability. It is important to have long-term durability commitments, so it has to be at least for 30 years. And there is also a price transparency and fair revenue sharing with local stakeholders. I think it's a bit long, so I don't want to read, and then if there is some question, maybe just to highlight a specific pilot program on biodiversity certification that we have to maintain or restore wetlands in the Seine basin. So we have right now a pilot site in the Seine basin, which is also monitored by the European Commission, and which was launched in November 2024. So it is right now in its initial phase, and it's developing the theoretical framework and market design condition to run until October 2025. This will be followed by field testing through 2027 and leading to the full operational deployment of the financial mechanism. So just to conclude, once again, I think from our perspective, I think there is a lot of willingness that we're seeing from private sector, from all the different stakeholders. What we also saw is one, the complexity of it and the necessary actions that are needed, including signal from the governments, both to set up the right framework, so there is trust from all the different actors, but also ensuring that when we implement it with the right condition to avoid any distortion also in the market. And the idea through this is to have something that is robust and that can go in the long terms. And I think that that's where governments have an important role. Thank you very much.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you, Marine, for sharing the government perspective, but also how France is advancing these nature markets. I'd like to turn now to Paul. Paul, subnational governments are also playing a key role in supporting nature credits, not only in Brazil, but worldwide. Can you tell us about how your state and others in Brazil have been experimenting with pilots and policy measures? Feel free to speak in Portuguese if you feel that it's better for you. If you want, we have also headphones and the channel is 19 in case you need it.
We will speak in English. Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. Thank you, IPB. Thank you, World Wildlife Fund, Michelle. Thank you, Abema here also. And thank you all. Thank you, UK, for this pavilion also. And thank you, Igarapé. And I think the question should be, I prepare some text, but I'm trying to start with some consideration. Here in Brazil, we have some potential examples, but the dimension here, the size here is are quite so different. So São Paulo state is the half of Spain country, and with the double of the population, for instance. And another example is that we have example made it last years with the support of Jeff and the partnership of the ministry, the federal ministry, and the World Wildlife Fund and other different states, and just adding 14 or 13 states, I guess we call a part of areas that are mainly to protect species, but using territorial approaches, And adding these PATs that we call, adding these areas, we cover more the territory of France, and they're just part of it. So this is why it's so important for us to have this subnational approach in countries like Brazil. So now I will return on reading this and trying to answer with this proper context, no? And when we talk about subnational governments, we can talk about different kinds of territories, no? Not only states, as we call the 27 subnational governments here in Brazil. And this is the idea, to show you these opportunities, and all of them with some examples that we could try to just mention, and later we can debate, or when we finish we can talk together. No? And some aspects are highlighted, and maybe trying to connect this relation between numbers. We have almost 200 countries working here on COPs, like today, and like Yerevan that was mentioned, like Mongolia next year with desertification. But we have some level that the subnational governments, and then almost 5,000 subnational governments in the world, connecting these 200 governments with 1 million of local authorities. And this is our role, trying to make the things move faster than we are doing today, and as the nature credits, And we can select just an example, 3 examples. Credits for what? So we're trying to work on the concept of climate emergencies that it's already known, and we are talking about biodiversity emergencies. We are connecting the links with these 2 conventions, United Nations conventions. The other is the possibility to make pilots. This could be done, and using association like ours, ABEMA links the 27 states through 50 members, But we have also different associations and different countries or different parts of the world, like CONGOPE in Ecuador, ANAI in Mexico, and even in European Union, like CORE, the Committee of Regions. So we have different possibilities to reach using straight the connection with these subnational governments. And there are other special territories. We launched some days ago. I'm invited by UNESCO, the UNESCO sites, and we have Ramsar sites that link in different parts of the territories. For instance, we have 784 biosphere reserves in 142 countries. The Natural World Heritage Sites, we have 266 considering the nature sites. And geoparks, we have 229 covering 50 countries. And so we have different approaches linked to this question, because the largest part of the support of these special sites are also made by subnational governments here. And just now trying to conclude the answer, we mention here some public banks, some development banks, but every state or some states linked with the neighbors, and then we have all the Brazilian states covered and supported by agencies or public banks to support the development. So these are partners very important for us. These involve the SIP, Bandes from Espírito Santo, The Brazil South Regional and Development Bank, BRDE, they has their own green fund to discuss, and they are developing and acting as a player on the credit, biodiversity credits right now. We have also foundations. Every one of the 27 states has also foundations to support science, technology, and innovation. That means to support monitoring, because we want to be sure, to assure that all these credits are having a good impact, and maybe we can join them also. We can meet with these global ecosystems approaches, considering savannas or grasslands, considering, like we launched this COP, the tropical forest, considering ocean, considering urban areas. So we have these different possibilities. We discuss a little bit more, considering unique products linked with nature conservation. We're talking about cheese, and we have the mate, the ilex from the São Paulo and the South States and Paraguay and Uruguay to conclude this example of unique products that could be used as examples. And we have the Paraná state with biodiversity credits in a model supported by the government, a legal framework with the Life Institute working with them. Santa Catarina state also, Paraná to support private protected areas, Santa Catarina to support public supported areas. São Paulo is developing this legal framework. And we have, just to conclude, we have a different public areas that we could, lines that we could join with market solutions.
Thank you, Paul, for sharing with us how in the local level you're leading innovation. Like, we have many pilots leading innovation and paving the way for us to scale these nature markets. And since you mentioned developments, I'd like to turn to Yoko to ask her if you can tell us more about how the Asian Development Bank is working with governments in this field. And also, if you could illustrate this with the project you are doing in China in the Shisui River Basin. I'm sure I didn't pronounce it correctly, so please.
Well, thank you very much for inviting me, and thanks for IAPB for organizing and inviting. So Asian Development Bank, as you may know, is one of the MDBs, the Multilateral Development Bank, and a regional development bank focusing on Asia and Pacific, providing support, technical and financial support to governments and other stakeholders. And so we have been working on nature, environment, and climate change for decades now. And one of the key, facts is that the recent Asia Pacific climate report, which is focusing on unlocking nature for development, revealed that 75% of our economy in Asia Pacific actually relies on nature and natural resources. So nature is not a cost. Nature is an asset for Asia and the Pacific. And so we have been investing in this area and particularly supporting different financial instruments to support that. And for that reason, we launched the Nature Solutions Finance Hub 2 years ago to basically have a platform where we can bring in both sovereign, non-sovereign resources, originate a scaled version of nature-based solution. And for that, first of all, designing a right project is really important, but having strong financial instruments like bonds and credits, debt for nature swap, and other mechanism is recognized really important. So we did actually test by having a first biodiversity bond among the Multilateral Development Bank last year, a 100 million bond. But now we're really venturing into the nature credit world and getting sort of support from many others. And one thing is that multilateral development banks, we have a nature group This is 10 MDBs coming together and really committed to scale up nature finance and address climate and sustainable development issues. And this was announced by our MDB heads in Glasgow at COP26. So based on that sort of commitment among MDBs, now we're having a biodiversity credit working group and addressing how MDB like ours can support governments and other stakeholders so that we can advance and scale this mechanism moving forward. And it's still a new mechanism and a new market, and we really need to be, of course, inclusive and also learn from the lessons from carbon credit and other initiatives. So that's where we are in terms of how we're working on it. 3 ways that we're supporting the government on how we support on carbon credit. Not carbon credit, of course, nature credit. So getting tired with 2 weeks of being here, sorry about that. So the 3 ways of working on it. One is supporting policy and regulatory framework. So this is a critical area that MDBs can be really supporting the governments and the countries to establish the enabling policies and also standards and regulations for nature credits. And so fostering the enabling environment for this growth is really important. And then the second area that we are supporting is facilitating stakeholders. The Minister of Nature from UK really emphasized that government and private sector is not enough for building nature credits. We really need local communities, particularly Indigenous peoples, and I'm really looking forward for your intervention. And we shouldn't be just talking and saying good words about it, but have a mechanism to build in and have an early consultation with many stakeholders and have an inclusive approach. So that's the sort of approach that facilitating stakeholder engagement is something that we are committed from the ADB side. And then the last part of how we support government is the integrated nature credit into development finance. I think this is a really important area because we're not just doing nature credit for the sake of nature only. We are looking at how can we incorporate nature credit and that finance into sector work like energy, like transport, agriculture, and others. And with the investment that we make in the countries, we can integrate those elements in our investment portfolio and have a robust impact on the ground. And finally, I would like to just highlight a little bit about the Shishui River Basin, the first nature credit initiative that ADB is supporting and be part of the IAPB's community of practice. This is basically a river basin initiative with companies around using the water resources in the Yanchen River Basin. And this is basically from our side to support the government and the local government. And I really appreciated your intervention about how important the local government is in order to develop a viable scheme that is fit for the purpose and also develop a project that can really have strong impact on the ground. So it's both on the policy side, but also on the implementation. And for this project, it will be having a strong impact to the agriculture and water use of the industries. And we're looking at 250,000 people in the Yanchen River Basin, the Shishui River Basin, to have the impact. And particularly women who are the agriculture bearers will be having more than half of that benefits. And that's what we are aiming for. So these initiatives have a really confound impact to the local communities, and also we can scale up in different communities. And one of them, we're trying to replicate this model in the Flyway initiative in Philippines and other Indonesia and other places as well. So thank you very much again, and looking forward to the dialogue. Thank you.
Thank you, Yoko, for sharing how multilateral development banks can, such as the ADB, can mobilize finance and technical expertise to help governments turn ambition into action. I'd like to turn now to Zaria. I know that Yoko already introduced the importance of integrating local communities in these frameworks. Could you tell us about the essential role of indigenous peoples and local communities in nature credit markets, and how should the government work with IPs and LCs to ensure inclusive and equitable market design and integrity?
Thank you, Ilona, for this opportunity. I want to start by saying that whether we want to accept or not, there is a causal connection between the local communities, indigenous people on the one side, and nature credits on the other side. In my answer, I will try to emphasize this. These groups are essential to nature credit markets because they care for many of the world's most biodiverse and carbon-rich ecosystems. Their generations of knowledge, legal and cultural ties to the land, and on-the-ground stewardship make projects more accurate, more ethical, and more likely to succeed. Involving them protects ecosystems, improves monitoring, prevents land conflicts, and increases trust in the credits produced. Their role isn't just about fairness, it's about making sure that these markets actually work. I want to emphasize this by saying the following. The knowledge these groups have of land runs deep. It comes from countless generations of observing and living with the environment. The wisdom they've gained helps design stronger, more realistic nature projects. They support ecosystem restoration in ways science alone often cannot. These groups help keep ecosystems healthy over the long term. Nature credit markets depend on ecosystems. These groups, indigenous peoples and local community governance, helps to ensure less risk of deforestation or land damage, long-lasting carbon storage, continued protection of wildlife. Because of these communities, because these communities live and care for the land, projects are most likely to succeed. Another thing is that they help plan and run projects on the ground. These groups often take part in designing nature-based solutions, restoring forests and grasslands, tracking species, and environmental changes. Their involvement makes monitoring more accurate and often less expensive. The last point I have is they strengthen trust in the market. Buyers increasingly want credits that respect indigenous rights, support local communities, and have strong environmental results. Projects led or co-led by indigenous peoples or local communities generally earn more trust. And to give an answer on the second part of your question, governments have to create fair markets. And this means that they include and benefit indigenous peoples and local communities. They have to create a truly inclusive economy, which means that they have to design markets where indigenous people and local communities are co-owners and primary beneficiaries, not just people who are affected. Government must stop just asking for opinions and start building real partnerships. This means respecting the independence of those groups, sharing power, and removing unfair obstacles. The first and most important step for governments is to officially recognize and uphold the rights of indigenous people and local communities. This is the foundation for any fair partnership. Governments must build true partnerships, not just hold consultations. And I'm glad with one thing the minister shared earlier. These groups have to be involved. We must see them as partners, not participants. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sadia. Such a powerful message. It's not only a matter of fairness, it's a matter of how we make this work actually on the ground. So I'd like to open the floor now for any interventions or questions. We still have a few minutes. If someone wants to raise any question for any of the panelists. Okay, if we have one question.
Thank you. I just want to make a comment or compliment the last speaker. I'm coming from an indigenous pastoralist community of Cameroon. So what he said is actually like a replica or what we are doing in Cameroon. So since I've lost my voice, I totally 100% agree what he just said. Thank you.
Thank you. I have two questions. First, how to systematize credits for public and or collective use areas? And two question, how to generate incentives for investments in biodiversity credits so that they have economic viability, including at the local or subnational scale. You know? Thanks.
Thank you so much for the presenters. I just have one comment. About the indigenous people. My name is Steven, I'm from Uganda. I just wanted to understand how it is done from our perspective in Brazil. I know that for the indigenous people to really defend their rights, they need to have the awareness and the knowledge. How is the government of Brazil supporting the indigenous people in terms of knowledge and capacity building to develop them to have the capacity to defend? Because if there are just a few leaders of the indigenous people, they can be compromised by the big government. So how is this capacity being developed in the indigenous people such that they can also understand their rights and fight for them? Thank you.
So who wants to start? Do we have more questions? Oh, sorry.
Thank you. My name is Sostenes Kewe from Tanzania. My question is directed towards Asian Development Bank. Because of your role as an MDB, usually in our communities, it's very difficult to get the resources mobilized in the way that the local communities can actually appreciate. There's a top-down approach because there's money from somewhere. In your experience, as you work with local DFIs, for example, do you have any experience from anywhere how you have, facilitated local DFIs to work with local communities to mobilize those resources for ownership and commitment? Thank you.
Who wants to begin? We have 3 questions. Okay.
I want to reply on that what Mr. here said. In my experience, my people are frequently afraid of government because government is big, government has money, and we don't have money, for example. But I think that if we speak about real partnership, we don't only have to look at government. We have to look at ourselves first. This means that we have to create awareness among our people. We have to make them know that we are in a fight together. If we want that government see us as partners, and not participants, it starts with us. So let's mobilize our people. Let's make our people aware of what we are, what is asked from them.
Great. Thank you very much for the question regarding MDB's role in reaching out to local communities. So as you rightly mentioned, the way that we're really trying to reach out more towards local communities and local initiatives are exactly what you mentioned, to utilize the financial intermediaries and on granting or on financing basically our resources. So more and more nature-related projects like agri-food businesses or air quality or circular economy, we are actually doing investment through financial institution on the ground. And many, those actually can be reached more on the rural areas or remote areas, and that's where we're seeing a lot of good results coming up. So we find that these modalities really help to particularly scale up some of the SMEs work and innovative work on the ground. I also wanted to build on the question on the how are we working on the local sort of scale or local government. So the Shishui River Basin initiative, the first carbon credit example that I mentioned, we first need to, of course, develop a national regulatory framework and able to sort of set up the nature credit and also the market system. But at the same time, this is a particular river basin areas, and we are identifying and valuing some of these wetlands and others so that it can be credited. And that sort of valuation and also reporting and monitoring is done at the local level with local communities and local governments. And I think that's sort of the different level of collaboration that we can encourage through these initiatives. And all these layers are really important. Thank you.
Sure, thank you. Maybe on the, I think one thing link also for us, the way we've seen that has been to make it work and to have also the investment, but also the trust. I think it's also what you've said, the importance of the subnational level. So at the government, we can put a framework, but then the project is designed at the national level. So for example, one thing I was reading again is that the framework in France does not impose a methodology on the measures in terms of biodiversity gain, so that it is defined when there is an agreement on the site that will need to be restored. And that allows to really make sure that it's adapted to the territories that are being protected. The second thing is the question of inclusivity. So for example, in the sites, in the places that we have in France, we are working with the agricultures, the farmers, just to also make sure that they are involved. So if you don't have that inclusivity with the people on the ground, depending on where you are with the indigenous peoples and local communities, as you were indicating, if you want it to last, you need to have all these different actors on the ground to define the project together. And that's how you can make sure that you have outcomes, that there is trust also, both from the companies that come to invest, but also from the people on the ground. Thank you.
Thank you so much for the insights. We have just a couple of minutes and then we have to close, okay?
No, just to trying to wrap. So we have some aspects related to democracy linked here in this discussion, that we must have more participative possibilities, and it's up to us also to make this works. And education that we have can also have more people already prepared to discuss and to participate on these actions. And we have different difference between or among the levels of government. So when we talk government, we are talking about federal government, subnational government, and local governments or authorities. So we must participate on them, and we must link all the plans that we are trying to do here in Brazil. So we have the national BISAP, for instance, and we are launching this month, next month now, the template for the 27 subnational BSAPs. Link it with the federal and link it with the local BSAPs, but all of them made with the participative or the participation and all of the authors of that. So, and just to conclude, and for instance, the example of Santa Catarina state on the biodiversity credits, when we have just approach coming in a huge country, coming from federal, we have some companies. When we are going to the ground, we are finding different kinds of companies, different kinds of business that are linked to this nature credits, linked with this situation, this relation, the neighborhood with the population. So when we are going down, we are improving, we are increasing the number of the networks that we can embrace and to considering this nature credit. So this is one point to do this. We have different examples on private-private, public-private, and public-public, considering the credits.
Thank you, Paul. I think this multi-level perspective is very important, but also this conversation with multiple stakeholders from local communities, multilateral development banks, national and subnational governments. So thank you for your insights. I'd like to invite Camille for the closing remarks of our session.
Thank you, Maria Eduarda. I will be very short. Zaria, Yoko, Marine, Paul, Maria Eduarda, thank you so much for such an insightful panel. High integrity of nature credit markets means verified and additional outcome for nature and people, fairness and equity to local communities and indigenous people, and market governance and integrity. Governments, local and subnational governments, local communities, indigenous people, and public development banks are critical actors for the emergence of this new and additional financing instrument for nature, climate adaptation, and mitigation. On those words, thank you so much for participating in this panel, and thank you again to our distinguished speakers.